Hello and welcome to Yerushalmi Peah Daf Chaf Gimel. We are wrapping up the second parak, Be'ez Hashem, one more day. So there's a very famous Gemara, and I want to just kind of go through these 2 points, which both have to do with the importance of Torah Misinai. So Rishuman Levi says that when it describes the Luchos, Va'aleim Kechol Advarim, it says on them was everything. So the Gemara darshans from these extra words. There's a lot of extra verbiage here. So aleim, it's what's the aleim? It should say aleim, on them. What's and on them? And is coming to include kol and kichol hadvarim. What's this extra? Just say aleim kol dvarim. What's the aleim? What's the extra kichol? And what's the extra hadvarim? So it says that it hints to the fact that Moshe was told about all these things. Mikra, he knew the Psukim. Mishnah, he knew the Mishnayos. Talmid, he knew the Gemara, the Agados, and he knew the Agados. Now, that's 4 things, and the Pasuk only had 3. And then it says, we'll come back to that in a second, Afilu Masha Talmid Vasik Asid L'chadesh L'fnei Rabo Kivar Nemer L'Moshe Sinai. Even something that a Talmud would say in front of his Rebbe was said in front of Sinai. So this is actually a famous Bavli and a Yerushalmi as well. And so let's just zoom out. Yefei Torah wants to know, why does Moshe have to know these things? So he says that because Moshe had to receive the entire Torah. And also, Moshe inspires these ideas. Remember, it says that a child learns Kol Torah Kula inside his mother's stomach. So it all has to go through Moshe. Now, what the Gemara seems to be saying is not necessarily it's these 4 things specifically. The Gemara seems to be saying that in general everything was told to Moshe. So now, in what form was it told to Moshe? So there's a couple of points. First of all, the Mishnayos itself, like Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky used to say, is the keys to Shas. And in the Mishnayos, sometimes little words, little nuances already encapsulate so much of the Gemara. The Gemara, is medayik from Mishnayos very, very heavily. So therefore, the seeming simple explanation of all these things is that in what Moshe was told, that answered the question. There's a very famous There's a very famous story with the Vilna Gaon, that there was a local professor in Vilna that came to visit the Vilna Gaon and wanted to see what was so impressive about him. And so he asked him his most difficult question that he was stuck on. And the Vilna Gaon spent, according to this story, 1 minute explaining the answer to that question. And the man was blown away by the brilliance of Vilna Gaon. Some people say that Kramer's law, by the way, in geometry, is from the Vilna Gaon. I was not able to verify whether it's true or not, although his name was Eliyahu Kramer. But I did find that there's a book called Ayol Mishulish, which is a book on geometry that was apparently written by the Vilna Gaon. I saw it in an Otzer in Kiryat Sefer many, many years ago, and I've seen it in other places as well, and it just kind of explains geometry, which is really fascinating. It makes a lot of sense to me because I happen to love geometry, and it's very logical, and the Vilna Gaon's approach was certainly brilliant and logical, and knowing geometry helps a person throughout Shas, in Eruvin, and many other places. So it makes sense that he would have studied it, etc. There's a story about him that he wanted to go to medical school, and his father told him that he would not be able to dedicate his life to Torah because he'd be a good doctor and he'd be mechuyev to save people's lives all day, and perhaps he should focus on saving people's spiritual lives. But anyway, the point is that this professor came to speak to the Vilna Gaon, and the Vilna Gaon gave a formula answer, and the man was blown away. He went back and he discussed it in the university, and he realized that the answer answered a lot of questions, but it still left a few. So he came back to see the Vilna Gaon, and the Vilna Gaon patiently repeated his entire answer verbatim as to what he had said. And the man said, "Oh, now I understand what you were answering." Okay. And the man went back, and his mind was blown. He didn't realize how much detail this genius rabbi had incorporated in his original answer. And then again, he got stuck with some of the parts, came back, and the Vilna Gaon repeated himself for a 3rd time verbatim. So what that shows is that in the answer, he had preempted exactly what he was trying to say. He had preempted all the questions that were going to arise, just this man didn't appreciate it. There was someone that said over that he asked Rav David Feinstein a question, and Rav David used to try to preempt a lot of the things the questions that would come up later, and the doubts that would come up later in many of his answers. He would formulate it that way. That's the way the geniuses think. That's the way they talk. Kol Shkein the Torah is that way. So the way I've always understood it was that the Torah was given to Moshe, the formulas, the basic formulas. In that answer, in that explanation, that answers all the questions that were there. Now, what does it mean that the Talmid Vasik is Asad L'Chadish? So, 2 parts. One of them is that there's a way to understand the Torah in Mikra B'Tzei Pshuto. There's a way to understand the Torah through the Yud Gimel Midah Shetorah Nidreshes, or through the Lamed Beis ways, which, by the way, we talked about this earlier, the Lamed Beis ways of the 32 ways that's another brisa, that why aren't there is overlap between them, but why are they not all included? So one answer that I saw brought down about the 32 ways of Rabbi Eliezer ben Rabbi Yosei Glili is because most of his are not so relevant. The Shloshis Ramidas Shaitar Jusbam are the most common ones, and also a lot of those have to do with Agadata, and so that one is also not included, the Agadata story. But anyway, the Agadata tools. We'll save that for a different time, even though we're in the middle of Agadata, and there's a lot to say about that. So another thing is that Talmid Vasik L'Chadesh Lifnei Rabo, the Mepharshim say this in the Bavli as well, that it means that it has to be something valid, not just something that some person makes up, but a Talmid Vasik, which means a sharp Talmid, old, here it says, so Lifnei Rabo, it has to be something that makes sense in Torah, that there's accountability there. And the last thing I was going to say was that there is such a concept of Rabbeinu Hinichu Li Makom, that there's a special place in Torah that was never said. For example, the Maharal has a chiddush in Torah R on Hilchos Chanukah that you're only allowed to use oil because the miracle happened with oil. No one else, although you could argue there probably were a few people here and there, but overall, that's his chiddush that he says. There are many other chidushim. We've talked about these. There's famous Noda Yehudas and Chasam Sofers and other things of Anichli Avosai that they left me in one spot. It's based on a Gemara. There's a Gemara that says such a concept. So there is such a concept, and how that works is beyond the scope of this conversation. But just to see that could be part of it, that it came from Moshe, but it was left for a certain person to be goder. Obviously, there's no mitzvahs they're creating. There's no huge nafkaminas usually, but that's what it is. Okay. So then I want to say, I think I talked about earlier. Something from the Noda Yehuda about Peah, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so that's what the Torah is saying. Now, the implication here is very odd because it seems like it's saying this was written on the Luchos. So there's actually Yerushalmi, and there's actually a Medrash as well, that says that in between each of the Dibros on the Luchos were all the corollaries of that. So in fact, these things were actually somewhat written on them. Save that for a different time. Okay, and then the second part that I want to say is a very famous Gemara, which is found here with Yerushalmi, which was quoted by the Ramban in his debate with Pablo Cristiani. The Ramban basically, Yadua, had to debate the king of Argon, forced him to debate with Pablo Cristiani, who was unfortunately a Meshumah Jew who had converted and wanted to prove his alliance to the church. And so the Ramban said that I'll debate him, but you have to give me permission to say whatever's on my mind, whatever I want to say. Otherwise I can't. It's not a fair debate. And so the Ramban decimated him and put it in Sefer Vikuach. He wrote it, and the king of Oregon gave him apparently golden coins, a very large sum, and said, "You won, but now get out of my country." So you won, but now you can't be here. According to some Gears in the story, it was, "I can't protect you. People are going to try to kill you." In other versions, it's, "I'm going to kill you." So the Ramban, that was the impetus for the Ramban moving to Eretz Yisrael, where he finished his commentary on Chumash. So there, they asked him that there's a passage that says that Jesus is born on Tisha B'Av and other places, etc. So you see that even you Jews believe that Jesus was already born. So he quoted this brisa, and it's a whole machlokas about how to understand it, but Rav Zera b'Shem Shmuel, it's on this page. Ein lemeidin, you cannot learn lo min halachos, v'lo min hagados, v'lo min toseftos, ela min Talmid. You can't bring any proofs from these things, from the agados, and he quoted this as being from the Midrashim, and there's a Tajbeit, there's actually, if you look in the Kol Kisser Ramban that Shvel's, that's all created, he did a phenomenal job. He has a phenomenal footnote if you want the history over there beyond the scope of this conversation, but he literally brings down I would say dozens of sources that have been mefalfel with the Ramban. Was he just giving him an answer as a decoy? Did he really mean it? What does that mean? And there are many Mefarshim that talk about here exactly what it means, that you can't learn from Agadata story at all. You can't learn halacha at all. It's kind of like disclaimers that people put in books. You can't, I'm trying to bring out a story, but don't take any halacha from it, which is true. It makes sense that way. So how that works exactly is beyond the scope of today, but just I wanted you to be aware of those two major things about all Torah is given to from Sinai to Moshe, and also the idea of what does this mean. There's a concept in Chazal of not learning from Agados. Have a great day.